All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the latest in our series of ENO Center for Transportation webinars. ENO is an independent nonprofit that shapes public debate on critical multimodal transportation issues and builds a network of innovative transportation professionals. My name is Kirby Farrell, and I'm a policy analyst at ENO. Today's webinar is an open discussion surrounding a report completed by our ENO research team, including Sohail Hussain, Jeff Davis, and myself. The report was sponsored by the National Waterways Foundation and is titled Benefits and Beneficiaries of the Nation's Inland Waterways. We would love for this to be a collaborative conversation, so throughout our webinar, please do engage with us. Feel free to enter any questions in the box on the side of your screen, and we will get to as many of those as possible during our Q&A. While we don't expect any tech issues, we've found that refreshing your browser can help with any minor issues that come up for individual listeners. ENO is happy to offer our webinar series free of charge, but if you enjoy our webinars and are interested in supporting ENO's work, you can check out the link in the chat box to donate or become a member. After we wrap up today, tomorrow we will add a recording of the webinar to the event page on our website. So getting into this, I'll tell you a little bit more about our study momentarily, but I would first like to introduce my co-moderator and our panelists for today. There we go. I've obviously already introduced myself, but co-moderating today's webinar is Deb Calhoun. Deb is the Senior Vice President for the Waterways Council and the Secretary for National Waterways Foundation, our report sponsor. As far as our wonderful panel, that includes three incredibly talented waterway experts. Stephanie Bowman is the Maritime Industry Director for Washington State's Department of Commerce. Joan Kranovich is the Vice President of Business Growth and Director of Sports for Visit Quad Cities. And Janine Mansour is the Director of Trade Development for the Port of New Orleans. Before I kick it over to our webinar participants for their more in-depth intros, I wanted to provide some context around ENO's Waterways study. As mentioned, the report is titled Benefits and Beneficiaries of the Nation's Inland Waterways. The report was released in the fall of 2024, and its purpose was to highlight the array of benefits and beneficiaries linked to the nation's inland waterways. While the inland system is often thought of for its transportation impacts, the study attempted to capture the vast impacts of the waterways, many of which have resulted from infrastructure improvements and the ability to manage the waterways. Getting into our benefits and characterizing these, our study team organized these by separating them into three umbrella categories, including economic impact, energy and sustainability, and safety, security, and resiliency. Under economic impact, these benefits included industrial, commercial, and residential property development, jobs and community impact, and tourism and recreation. For energy and sustainability, the subtopics included hydropower, irrigation, water supply, cooling, and the beneficial uses of dredged material. And finally, safety, security, and resiliency included transportation safety and congestion alleviation, flood control, national security, and global competitiveness. Under each of these benefits within the larger categories, our team utilized case studies to discuss how these benefits impact different regions across the country. While many of these benefits are not exclusive to just one of these larger categories, this organization provides a framework from which we can think about the many non-transportation and bigger picture benefits provided by the inland waterways. So now that you all have heard enough of me talking, let's go ahead and meet our co-moderator and panelists for today's webinar. We can start with Deb, but here's the question I have for each participant. Can each of you take a moment to tell us a bit more about yourselves, your organization, and why the waterways are so important to your region?
Great. Thank you so much, Kirby. Let me first tell you about the National Waterways Foundation and its mission. As Kirby said, we did co-sponsor this study or sponsored this study with ENO Transportation. Our mission is really to develop intellectual and factual arguments to educate folks about the need for an efficient, well-funded, and secure inland waterways system. We facilitate and commission research that's peer reviewed to really address some of these public policy issues that are contained in this study. All of it's related to our inland waterways system, and it really does help to educate the public and our other audiences to understand how we maintain this valuable inland waterway system. We can enhance its capabilities and promote its value. The reason we did this study, and I think why this is such a crucial and critical study, is that it is important to highlight the many users, the many diverse users of the system that benefit from really this natural gem to the United States that runs from the top of the system to the Gulf for export. The inland waterway system facilitates competition in the world market for those who are shipping these key commodities by barge on our inland rivers, specifically our U.S. farmers, our energy producers and providers, our manufacturers, our constructors, and so many more. And so this system really identifies those non-commercial navigation beneficiaries and users of the system. As Kirby said, the study also looks at other benefit areas that provide economic development, energy, sustainability, safety, national security, and resilience to the United States. So unless we tell folks about all of these benefits to the system, people just don't know. So it really is a critically important study to educate so many audiences about the importance of this system. So thank you, Eno.
Thanks so much, Deb. Stephanie, we'll kick it over to you.
Well, good morning, and thank you so much for having me. I'm just thrilled to be a part of this panel, and I also wanted to thank Eno and the National Waterways Foundation for producing such a great study. I really enjoyed reading it over the weekend. It is comprehensive in terms of the benefits, and so I'm excited to talk about it today. My role is the Maritime Industry Director for the state of Washington through our Department of Commerce. In that role, I have the privilege of working with all 75 of Washington State's ports. We have a pretty unique system here in Washington State. No other state has as many ports as we do. We have those on the water and inland ports as well. I also work with our commercial fishing industry, shipbuilding industry, and basically anything else that touches the water except our Washington State ferry system. Prior to this role, I was a port commissioner for the Port of Seattle for 8.5 years, and I worked at the Port of Tacoma before that. So I've had a long history in the maritime industry and a great appreciation for our inland waterways, and I'm thrilled to talk more about this study today.
Thanks so much, Stephanie.
Hello, everyone. Joan Kranovich, Visit Quad Cities, and my role is the Vice President of Business Growth, Director of Sports QC. We are the destination marketing management organization for the Quad Cities. So I'll start by just explaining where the Quad Cities is, or the destination is. We are located in Iowa and Illinois, so we represent 2 states. There's about 58 communities that we represent, so the quad really doesn't mean quad, but we're joined together. All these communities are joined together by the Mississippi River, so there's a lot of great benefits there. We also have the Rock River that is a tributary right here in the community too, as well as many different lakes and other waterways that we represent. But our area is unique because we are, again, a bi-state area, but our organization is tasked with really talking about the benefits of bringing visitors to the community, whether they're a leisure visitor coming to just experience the community, or if they're a group visitor with a meeting, convention, tournament, motor coach. Maybe they're coming internationally. We are the home of John Deere World Headquarters here in the Quad Cities in Moline, Illinois. So we do get a lot of international visitors. They might have heard of John Deere or, through that, but I'd say our number one asset is the Mississippi River. That's what visitors usually name of the reason they're visiting our area and wanting to experience the river. We're the only area on the Mississippi River that it flows east to west. So if you look on a map, it is interesting just how Iowa and Illinois connect. The river does kind of flow over, and it confuses people when they're trying to get through, figure out where they're going or they're following the river. So that's always been a fun part of our job. But I'll talk more about some of the benefits that I've seen in the tourism aspect as we go along in this webinar.
Awesome. Thanks, Joan. Janine?
Great. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Janine Mansour. I'm the Director of Trade Development for the Port of New Orleans. Been with the port since 2010, always on the commercial team. So we're constantly marketing the Port of New Orleans and our region really for our multimodal connectivity. We often say river railroad in any type of presentation we're giving because it really is our biggest strategic advantage, having access to 14,500 miles via the Mississippi River and the inland waterway system, and then being the only deep water port that's connected to 6 national Class 1 railroads, and then as great proximity as well to the interstate highway system. So we are an independent political subdivision of the state of Louisiana, which is kind of a wordy way to say that we were created by the state of Louisiana. But we really don't rely on funding allocation from the state. We're generating all of our revenue through our own operations, which is about $100 million per year that we're reinvesting into our infrastructure. So we are a landlord port, so we're leasing out our maritime facilities to private terminal operators. Our assets begin at mile marker 89 on the river, so that's from the mouth 89 miles up, and then all the way up to mile marker 115. So oftentimes when we're talking about the amount of bulk transportation that's moving on the river, we're referring to the broader lower Mississippi River region. But just wanted to point out that our section is really 25 river miles of that broader lower Mississippi River region. So our 4 lines of business are cargo, of course, and followed by rail, real estate, and cruise. And thank you to E&O for this great study and also allowing Port of New Orleans to be a contributor for this study, and excited to be a part of this panel today.
Thanks so much,
Great.
Janine.
Yes, thank you to all of our panelists. I'm going to ask the next question. Of the benefits that are described earlier and that are in the report, which ones do you think are most relevant or prevalent for your organization or your region? Let's start with you, Stephanie.
Sure, thank you. That's a great question. Well, just to take a step back, let me just describe our inland waterway, which is the Snake River and the Columbia River. 365 miles that stretches across a 3-state region from Lewiston, Idaho, all the way to Portland, Oregon. The Columbia River divides Oregon and Washington, and so we've got benefits for the river on both sides. We have 8 locks and dams on our river system. And really, when I look at the report, what I appreciate most is talking about the multiple benefits that the inland waterways produce, and that could be no more clear than on the Snake and Columbia River. Probably the 2 largest ones are the ability to move cargo and the hydro system. But jobs, tourism, safety, security, and resiliency are all part of that. We have, in terms of the hydro system in our 8 locks and dams on the Columbia and Snake River produce about 40% of the electricity for the Pacific Northwest. In other words, another way to say that is about enough electricity to power 8 cities the size of Seattle. So it is a major contributor and foundational to our economies here in the Northwest. On the cargo side, a lot of people might not realize this, but the Columbia Snake River system allows us to export wheat. We are the #1 wheat exporter in the United States. We are #2 for soy and corn exports, and we're #3 in the world for grain exports. And that is all possible because of the Columbia and Snake River Inland Waterway. But in addition to that, we've got a lot of other benefits. I would love to hear more from our other panelists, but those are the 2 top ones. Tourism is a very big deal. We've got river cruises from American Cruise Lines. Resiliency is an important aspect of the Columbia Snake River for our road and rail on either side. Part of our river is about a 40-mile stretch of a very narrow gorge that was created by the Missoula floods back millions of years ago, but what has resulted in a very narrow transportation corridor. So the ability to use tug and barge to move those products on our inland waterways is absolutely critical. We estimate that 1 tug and barge on our system replaces about 76 trucks on our highways. That's really important on our Washington side of the river, where we only have a 2-lane highway. So there's the sustainability, resiliency, jobs, hydro, lots and lots of benefits in the Pacific Northwest from the Columbia Snake River system.
Great, thank you. Important to note that. Joan, same question, but I'll repeat it. So of those benefits that we talked about in the study that are pointed out in this study, which ones are most prevalent or relevant for the Quad Cities from your perspective or to your organization?
Yeah, thank you, Deb. Stephanie mentioned the tourism aspect, and of course, that's what we represent, and I see the most in our area. The river cruises have become even bigger in our area. They started in our area. We had riverboat gaming became legal in like 1989, 1990, in Iowa at least. And so what had happened is all the, casinos wanted to build and they used to cruise. So that a lot of them now are land-based casinos. We don't see that as much on our Mississippi River, but we've still seen the high propensity for people wanting to take those Mississippi River cruises. So American Cruise Lines is a great partner, and then Viking created a Mississippi River cruise line a few years ago. And so I think we're in our 3rd or 4th year now working with them, and it's just amazing to see the international visitors that want to see our destinations, want to see the river, want to experience, America that way. We have over 100 miles of trail in our area, and there's a 60-mile stretch, Great River Trail and Mississippi River Trail come together right on the river. So we see a high amount of people, especially as you're thinking about the younger people and deciding, the quality of life and where they want to live. You'll see a lot of people looking at trails and recreation on the river. Can they get out on a pontoon boat, or can they get a boat or jet ski? Can they get out there? Can they paddleboard somewhere in our area? They can also, go and watch. We have a water ski show that happens twice a week during the summer months, of course, spring, summer months. And so they can go out and do that. Can they get out on a bike? Can they get out on a scooter? Can they, go and recreate on these trails and on the river? We have non-gaming boats that you could come to our area and not necessarily have to start, at one side of the river and cruise all the way down. You could just come for a dinner cruise, a sightseeing cruise, or just get on one of our water taxis too. So we see a really strong amount. Our water taxis last year, I think, had like 47,000 people that took part in, riding it, whether they were just trying to get from one side of one state to another, or one side of the river to another, or if they're just trying to experience the river. So that tourism aspect, our area alone sees about 1.37 million people that want to get out on the river. And it's just a huge amount of tax revenue that comes into both states and our, destination of about a half a million people that live here. So I think that tourism aspect really stood out to me, and just looking at all the other areas and the other waterways and just the overall impact that the recreation and tourism has on all of us.
Great. And Janine, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would love to. If this was a test question, I would probably say all of the above. But since I'm on the trade development side, I would certainly have to first and foremost highlight the commercial economic impact of the river system. Really, it's not lost on us living in New Orleans that the river and New Orleans' strategic location was the reason the city was founded over 300 years ago. And really, we're seeing that, every day operating a port, over 60% of the nation's agricultural exports are flowing down from the breadbasket of America and then loaded out to bulk vessel for export. Over 200 million tons of agricultural products are exported from the lower Mississippi River system. So really, what we're most focused on the trade development side is really just fostering, those connections, as well as seeing how we can best promote the region. Of course, the river system provides, as it was mentioned, such economies of scale when it comes to barge transportation versus rail and truck, as well as the environmental benefits. It's the cleanest form of transportation to move on the inland waterway system. We've also, since 2016, have grown a very successful container on barge service. So there's really not many locations in the country that are using container on barge. It's really just three locations. We have Baltimore, Virginia, and then within New Orleans, or Louisiana, I should say, because we are moving containers from Baton Rouge, where a lot of the petrochemical companies are producing plastic resin. They're loaded into containers, put on hopper barges, generally moving in tows of 6 to 9 barges, and then are barged to New Orleans and then loaded out onto container vessels for exported all over the world. We're also working with America's Central Port in St. Louis. So looking to further partner with inland locations like St. Louis, as well as Memphis, that traditionally have surplus of empty container equipment that are then barged down and then loaded in Baton Rouge with U.S. manufactured plastic resin, and then are able to be exported all over the world. So that's a really exciting project. We were fortunate to get Maritime Administration, America's Marine Highway grant funding to support some of the infrastructure build out for a successful container on barge program. It's certainly not an easy economic case in terms of competitiveness with truck and rail. So it really has to be a very, cost-effective model. So that grant support was really critical. So again, I know that was kind of a long-winded answer, but I'd definitely highlight the commercial economic impact as my top focus, I guess, for this answer.
Great. Thank you so much. And I'll just add a couple of thoughts. I'm based here in Paducah, which is at the Paducah, Kentucky, which is at the confluence of two rivers, the Ohio and the Tennessee, and not far from the Mississippi River. And just in terms of community, we touched a little bit upon that when we talked about the Quad Cities. But here in Paducah, everything really revolves around the inland waterways and the river here. And Paducah really grew up, like so many towns across the United States, grew up around this river. And I've heard folks say, this is why Jefferson bought the place. This is a natural gem to the United States, all that it provides. And it was really purchased for trade and commerce. And so that continues today. But this study certainly points out all those additional benefits as well on beneficiaries and users. We also have many cruise and tourism boats coming here into Paducah. We're revitalizing our riverfront. We have a U.S. Maritime Administration Gateway office here. We have U.S. Coast Guard facilities. We have the River Discovery Center, which is our maritime museum here. We have all of the major barge companies located here, either headquartered or with offices here. So everything is really focused around the inland waterways industry. Also, Siemens Church Institute is based here as well. And so when you just talk about communities coming up around the river, I think we're all aware of that, but this study certainly underscores that as well.
And Deb, if I could just add, because I know Stephanie and Joan and you as well both all touched on the cruise activity. So a lot of the itineraries are originating in New Orleans. So we have over 120,000 cruise passengers every year that are taking river cruises, American Cruise Line, American Queen Steamboat Company, as well as Viking. So that's definitely an area that we're seeing a lot of growth in over the years. Of course, our ocean-going cruises were a bit of a unique market because it is 8-hour sailing time on the river until you get to open water, which is a lot longer than some of the other Florida cruise ports where it's 30 minutes and you're in the open water. But we're finding that passengers actually enjoy the kind of history of traversing the Mississippi River for 8 hours before they get into the Gulf. So yeah, it's definitely an area that we've seen a lot of growth in from a tourism perspective.
Yes, exciting. Kirby?
Sure. So I have another question for y'all, and then we'll start heading into the chat. But one of the things we really tried to highlight in this study is how important the waterways management and infrastructural improvements on the waterways have, I guess, enhanced the usability and enhanced a lot of these benefits. I know in particular, I'm thinking of Joan right now, because the Quad Cities have had kind of a unique experience with, kind of taming those rapids. So could each of you kind of talk a little bit about the importance of the infrastructure and how it has enhanced the waterways for each of you? And I guess we can start, I guess we can say that. We can start with, I don't know, let's start with Joan.
Sure. Yeah. So Mississippi River, of course, the rapids have always been, ever since the Quad Cities, each of the cities were founded, there has been a need for river pilots to help these boats go through the rapids and figure out how to get through this river. So we have a lock and dam system, of course, and it's great to have the Army Corps of Engineers, and it's great to have the benefit of that to tame the waters, because then we're able to host things like, we have this thing called Floatzilla, and it's kayaks and canoes, and there's like 2,500 to 3,000 of them that come together one day and just have fun. And I'm sure the lock masters just love when they're coming through and having to let all of those little boats through. But we host fishing tournaments. We're able to do so much more on the river because of that lock and dam system. But in the past, I guess the last 10 years, and now going forward 10 or more years, our bridges, we have several, we have 5 in this main Quad Cities area that go over the Mississippi River connecting Iowa and Illinois. And 20 years ago or more, they identified the Interstate 74 bridge going over the Mississippi River as one that really needed to be replaced. So it was finally done a few years ago, and it was the largest project that was happening, I think, pretty much during the pandemic. And we were able to open it. On one of the slides before this, there was a picture of that bridge, and we're really proud of it. But our communities were able to talk to the Iowa, Illinois Departments of Transportation, and they are managing a walkway or bikeway, across the river. So it's one of the only interstate bridges that has that, where people can literally walk across. They could bike their way across. There is a lookout area. We call it the Oculus. It's kind of the halfway point between Iowa and Illinois, and people can go out and just experience the river that way. It's just an amazing asset that was able to be added. And so now they're looking at the Interstate 80 bridge, which is a little bit closer to like the LeClaire area. And it is going to be replaced, I'd say, within the next 10 years. And now the communities, actually Rock Island County on the Illinois side and then LeClaire, Iowa, are going to be maintaining another pedestrian area for people to be able to walk across. So now we'll have even more connectivity. But these changes all are coming from a lot of like our biking community. They're coming from our communities and our counties saying, we need this. We want to be a must experience destination on the river. We want people to be able to get out on the river, even if they're not able to get on a boat, or maybe they're not able to go out, some other way. But I think just those, maintaining those waterways, maintaining the infrastructure around it, because there's always talk in our area, especially when we were trying to figure out this Interstate 80 bridge. They wanted to save the bridge and build a new bridge, and they wanted to save the bridge and create this state park, like a bison bridge park, and hopefully at some point become a national park. It didn't end up happening, despite, the amount of research effort and people that were on board and money raised. A lot of the environmental aspects came into play, just didn't work out when looking at the Iowa and Illinois DOT. But we're always, being in tourism and being a champion for the recreation on the river, we're always going to be, advocating for more, whatever assets are going to help and whatever is needed to be done to make it safe for people to be either on the river or to be experiencing the river.
So maybe we'll head over to Stephanie.
Sure. Thank you. Well, a couple of things in particular that come to mind. First of all, I just want to call out, and I know that we all agree, just the incredible work of the Army Corps of Engineers. None of what we can do on our inland waterways would be possible without their expertise. And we're just completely reliant upon them in a very good way. I know that there have been talks of cuts across the federal government, but having the Army Corps of Engineers at our side to make sure that our river, the Snake and the Columbia River, are navigable is critical. Without them, we would not have the safety and security of the lock and dam system, which first and foremost allows us to navigate the river. There were huge waterfalls on the Columbia prior to the lock and dam system, making it not a good transportation corridor. With that system now, we have the ability, as I said earlier, to move those critical agricultural products and other products as well. I wish I had the ability to show my background that I normally have when I'm speaking. I have this wonderful picture of the Columbia River from the Oregon side to the Washington side, and it's showing one of our tug and barge companies carrying windmill blades. And it's carrying them inland for our wind farms. And at the same time, while this tug and barge is going through, there's probably 50 kiteboarders on the water skirting around the tug and barge. And it's a really good example of all the multiple uses of our river at the same time. But in terms also of being able to think about the infrastructure around it, irrigation, I haven't touched on that. It's absolutely critical for irrigation here in the Pacific Northwest. Obviously, much of the country has been experiencing droughts. We have as well. We've got a very low snowpack this year. So the irrigation, the Columbia and the Snake River provide over 300,000 acres of irrigated land. That helps us with, just your report called it out. I thought it was a really great stat. So kudos to your study authors. They mentioned that our irrigated crops here in Washington, irrigated by the Columbia River, provide enough apples to fill, I think it was for 18 million people, enough corn for 19 million people, and it was enough potatoes for 6 million people. So those are great stats, and I appreciate you calling it out. The last thing I'd say in terms of the importance of maintaining the infrastructure is for our inland ports that are further east on the river. And those, we call them the Tri-Cities, the cities of Richland, Kirkland, Kennewick. And they have benefited from industrial development as well as Pacific Northwest Labs, which is one of our national labs where the Hanford nuclear reactor is located. So we have benefits far inland as well as getting closer out to the coast. And again, we couldn't do any of that without the help of the Army Corps of Engineers. None of those benefits would exist without them.
Yeah, Stephanie, my ears perked up when you were talking about your photos, because at the Port of New Orleans, we've handled a lot of wind blades and towers that have come in by ocean-going vessels from overseas, and then our terminal operators discharge the blades and towers directly to barges that then move up to the Midwest. We haven't seen a lot of wind related cargo last year. I think a lot of the wind farm builds have completed in the Midwest, but for 2 to 3 years, we were handling a lot of wind related cargo. So I have a lot of those pictures, and maybe your picture originated in New Orleans. Not sure, but back to the question. So from an infrastructure standpoint, and just in terms of the needs, I guess, for a healthy river system, we're of course very focused on the dredging aspects. Being a deep water port, that means 45 feet of water depth maintained alongside at our facilities. But the Army Corps has completed phase 1 of their harbor deepening project from Southwest Pass, well beyond the Port of New Orleans jurisdiction, which extends up to 100-mile marker, 117 miles on the river. So that's critically important. As we know, vessels are getting larger and larger on a global scale. So the container vessels that are sailing today, a lot of them require 50 feet of water plus. And so for us to remain competitive, in New Orleans, we recognize in a big way, we're really the front door of the inland waterway system. We have to be able to handle those larger vessels. So in the Trans-Pacific trades, we're seeing the upsizing of vessels to 10,000 TEUs. A TEU is just a 20-foot equivalent unit, so a 20-foot container. And those vessels are requiring 45 to 47 foot of water draft. And so the dredging aspects from an infrastructure standpoint are just critical for remaining competitive. It's also a big reason why we are building a new container terminal, which is 17 river miles closer to the Gulf from our current Napoleon Avenue container terminal at mile marker 100. As vessels are getting larger, that we're actually seeing vessels that want to come to New Orleans that are too big to fit under the Mississippi River Bridge. The Crescent City connection has an air draft limitation of about 170 feet at 0 gauge. And so we've already had maybe 25 vessel omissions due to the fact of the river stage preventing the vessels from safely fitting under the Mississippi River Bridge. So in 2021, we purchased a 1,200-acre plot in Violet, which is at mile marker 83 on the river, to build a 400-acre new greenfield container terminal. So we should be receiving our Army Corps permit to break ground this year. So we're really excited. It's over a $2 billion project. And we actually received the largest federal grant in the history of any container terminal project, which between the mega and infra grant programs totaled $300 million. So we've got a strong federal support. We've also got our state support of about $150 million. And then the remaining is coming from the private sector as well as the Port of New Orleans bonding.
And I'll just jump in on this question as well. I also work for Waterways Council based in Washington, D.C., and we advocate for modern, efficient, well-maintained, reliable inland waterways, lock and dam infrastructure on the system. And, we're working with members of Congress to get good policy, and then certainly to work with appropriators in Congress so that the Corps has at least full and efficient funding for its work that is so critical. The challenge, I think, for the nation is that the locks and dams were meant to have a 50-year design life, and more than 80% of the locks on the inland system have exceeded that. And the Corps has done a great job of trying to maintain that. But like all the infrastructure in the United States, it requires recapitalization. And so all that foundational infrastructure, and locks and dams certainly are foundational, as is highlighted in this report, to keep that commerce moving and keep that competitive edge in the world market for our shippers. I think it's critically important that we continue to support the Corps, both in terms of the construction of auxiliary locks and dams that are meant for our more modern tows, those 1,200-foot chambers versus the older 600-foot chambers will have great efficiency gains in that. Right here in Paducah, one of the priority projects just really in our backyard is Kentucky Lock. So we're working very closely to see that larger chamber come online. Currently, we're seeing delays of, can amount to 7-8 hours for shippers to have to put half of their tow in the smaller 600-foot chamber and lock through, and then bring the second half through, and that can take hours and hours. And folks waiting in the queue. But with that larger lock, we should see the whole tow be able to move into that chamber. And we're looking at probably 45 minutes of lockage time. So great efficiency gains if we can maintain and modernize the lock and dam infrastructure on the system. So, in addition, operations and maintenance funding for the Corps is so very important to maintain our channels, so important for our ports, our inland ports, ports throughout the system. We have looked at low water for the last couple of years, and so being able to use those funds to dredge and move those products, in high and low water periods on the system, very, very important. So yes, the infrastructure is what keeps this system moving, and all of these beneficiaries able to, capture all the benefits of what's been pointed out in the report. Let me ask a very similar question. So why would you all say it's critical that we continue to maintain our waterways infrastructure? We've talked about why it's important, but why is it essential that we continue to maintain it? And let's start with Janine.
Oh my gosh, if we just thought if there wasn't, where I think it's always, I feel like it's always where our industries and the lobbying efforts of like your organization, Deb, is always really trying to get the message out, right? And this report certainly backs up with a lot of great facts, the need for maintenance, as we talked about the aging lock infrastructure. I think a lot of the locks are older than many of us on this call, but to think of, a vibrant inland waterway system that wasn't maintained, I mean, if that were the case, just to do a little doomsday scenario, you would really affect over 60% of the nation's agricultural exports, which then goes back to hurting, U.S. farmers and families and companies in America that rely on foreign markets to be successful. So I don't know, my mind first just goes to supporting the American economy. I think one of the heads of Canal Barge said it very best, where we're a quiet giant in the overall transportation system, where the average American citizen is much more familiar with road transportation, number one, and then rail transportation, but very much not aware of all the benefits and the critical importance of the inland waterway system.
Very true. Joan.
From our perspective, I'd say so we've had a few large projects happen here recently with dredging and making sure that our boats are able to still get in the water and safely be in the water. And without us maintaining, that river access and keeping up with the maintenance of it, I mean, you're going to start losing, the tourism aspect. You're going to lose I think our last fishing tournament generated over $1 million direct economic impact. So that's just a small piece of a tourism pie. But thinking about the larger, global aspect of it, we have a military base here that houses the First Army called the Rock Island Arsenal. And right on there, Lock and Dam 15 is located. And so just thinking about some of the national security parts of our rivers and our waterways too, it's mind-boggling just to think about if you weren't maintaining these not only the assets along the riverfront, but maintaining the riverfronts and the river itself, and making sure that it's safe for barges and safe for all of these containers to be transported. One thing that I was thinking about too is just the history of transportation and our waterways. I mean, before there were highways, before there were any other ways of transporting, I mean, of course, railroads came along too, but the waterways were it. And I think I saw a question pop up soon. That's one of the biggest things that people forget is the history of how we transported goods and how business got done. When we're thinking of John Deere, that's why he chose Moline, Illinois, right on the river, because he was able to, get all of the goods transported in by the river and be able to send things out by the river. So I think that's one thing to always think about too, is we can't, just forget about the history or forget about the maintenance of these assets.
Yes, and Stephanie.
Sure. A few more things to add, and building on with some other comments. I really appreciated what Janine said about the importance of our inland waterways to the national economy. And it certainly is here in the Pacific Northwest for our agricultural exports, which I mentioned earlier. But is of equal importance is the importance of the inland waterways to our regional economy here in the Pacific Northwest. It is literally the link between our urban and rural areas. The West is vast. Washington, Oregon, Idaho, Montana, the Dakotas, very large areas, and our inland waterways is the most efficient way to connect that. The other thing that I wanted to mention that we've only touched on just a little bit is the resiliency and national security, and a little bit of a personal story, but very apropos to the conversation. Some of you might remember, I think it's been about 8 years ago, there was an oil train derailment in Oregon, in a small town called Mosier, Oregon, where our major railroad derailed, and it created an enormous fire. Thankfully, no lives were lost in it, but it truly was only because of the great conditions of the day where there was no wind. Normally, it is a very, very windy time of year in early June. I happened to have a home in Mosier, and I was an eyewitness to this oil train derailment, and it shut down our highways for 4 days on both sides of the river. It completely backed up. And so thinking about, had that become more of a national problem, if we had been, it really had the opportunity to become one of the largest wildfires in the nation's history, we would have had no way to get in and out of that community except by water. And so I like to remind people that it's not just our highway system on either side of the river, but the critical role that the waterways themselves play in having resiliency to moving both goods and people where they need to get out of sometimes dangerous situations. So I just want to remind people of that important aspect as well.
Absolutely. Thank you all for your great responses to that. We have some really good questions in the chat here, so I want to get to one. We might not need an answer from all of our panelists on this one, but I know Deb at least probably has some good info on this. Congress has been talking a lot lately about maritime, including workforce issues. This question is, I'm interested to hear how inland areas are addressing workforce needs for merchant mariners. Are you recruiting people from elsewhere? Are there training opportunities for people who may not have river experience or credentials? So maybe we'll head over to Deb on this one.
Great. Yes, I'd love to answer this one. I think the inland waterways are a completely unique industry that more people need to know about. And not everybody is going to go to college for whatever reason. This is an industry that you can join a company, be fully trained. You would start as a deckhand, which is not the easiest job in the world, but you can forego your gym membership. It's a lot of work, but it's an opportunity then if you show diligence and like the lifestyle of living on board the towboat for 20 days on, 20 days off, whatever the company's schedule is. It varies with each company. Essentially, you are working about half of the year, and then you can be home with your family for the rest of the time or have another part-time job or whatever it may be. You are trained by your company, and then you have the opportunity to move up. You can move up to the wheelhouse to become a captain. You can be trained to be an engineer on the vessel. Certainly the most important job on a towboat is the cook. And if you've never had a meal on a towboat, I truly encourage you to do that. Then you will need to get a gym membership after that because it's kind of the best food in the world. But this is really an industry that not a lot of folks, I think, are aware of the opportunities to move up. In the other industries and transportation, you might get a better route if you're driving a truck, or you might get a better schedule, but it's likely not possible for you to move up very quickly into management as compared to the inland waterways industry. In fact, the National Waterways Foundation is currently working on a study looking at the uniqueness of our industry and the opportunity to move up and make a six-figure family wage salary very quickly. So there's many opportunities. Certainly, in New Orleans, for example, there are folks that go home at the end of every day. Maybe they have a fleet boat job. So there's lots of opportunities, but training is provided. You can live anywhere in the United States and you will be transported back to where the boat is. And if it's a lifestyle that works for you, again, working half of the year on and half of the year off, it is a great opportunity for our young people to consider a lifelong career with a great salary and great benefits.
And if I could add on to that on the workforce development, Deb's said it well with the merchant marines. I would also add that here in Washington State, our inland ports along the Columbia River are looking at producing at Columbia River College a degree in supply chain and logistics. We're looking to create a logistics hub with those 4 inland ports right along the Columbia River. And so for the exact same reasons that Deb is mentioning, that opportunity only exists because those ports are along the Columbia River, but this would be a great opportunity for local kids getting out of high school to get those credentials in supply chain and logistics, be able to be home at night, not have to go very far, be able to stay in their community and not have to travel out. As much as we love NOLA and the Port of Seattle and our larger ports, it's really great for them to be able to stay in their more rural communities. And it's because of the opportunity living on the Columbia River and having those programs. So we are literally just putting the program together as we speak. We're hoping to have it up and running by the fall.
Great.
Awesome. Very cool. We have some great questions in the chat, but I think this one is really interesting, so maybe someone can speak to it. Someone has asked, are there any rivers or defunct canals that you'd like to see made navigable that aren't currently navigable? I don't know if anyone has any thoughts on that. Maybe not, and that's okay.
Yeah, I do not. I mean, we have, I think, quite a robust list of priority navigation projects that the Corps is focused on to modernize that infrastructure, as I discussed. So I would say let's get through that portfolio, and then we can address that at a later date.
Absolutely. Well, there's another great question in here that I'd love to hear some of y'all's responses to. And we've kind of touched on this a bit, but this person has asked, most city locations originally developed around water access, yet with the rise of industrialization, the orientation of urban development patterns shifted towards surface transportation systems. So we moved away from waterways and moved to the highways. Do you foresee a possible future where we reintegrate inland waterways back into, cities and not maintain them as some kind of periphery asset? If so, what kind of resources would we need and what kind of support do the waterways need to do something like that?
I can speak from the Quad Cities. I don't know if it's exactly what they're asking, but just thinking through, all of our cities have gone through, they're thinking through what are we doing with our riverfronts, and they're wanting to, of course, make it more livable. Everybody wants livable downtowns, and we're so unique not having just one downtown we're representing. There's 4 to 5, there's 5 really main metro areas, and so each of them want to have livable space, they want to have recreation, they want to have a space maybe where there can be outdoor concerts along the river. Some of them are further along in their plans than others, but what we're trying to do is, how do we incorporate everyone's plans so you're not all duplicating and having the same assets or the same things? And so they all are one kind of cohesive master plan. We have a tourism master plan if you're ever wanting to look, at something we've done, and it has a lot of great river, use in it. It's on our visitquadcities.com website. But just thinking through, how are we guiding each of these cities, and, making sure that the river is the forefront of what they're thinking. Of course, the trade side of things is very important still, but just thinking through, making sure that it's the, backdrop, but also the front porch of, when people are visiting somewhere, they're trying to decide, are we going to live there or move our company there or what? So in our area, I think that, that's what the development has really been centered around.
I would say too that in this very study, we point up that waterfront property development is one of the benefits, and so certainly here in Paducah, I can speak to we are revitalizing our riverfront to be able to welcome more of those cruise ships and to get more people down to the river. So I think a lot of cities are doing that. Everybody wants to be by the inland waterways and the riverfront. And we in the United States, we're an intermodal society of transportation assets and options. So we can take more cargo on the inland waterways. The other modes, I think truck and rail are at max capacity now. So we certainly can take more on the inland waterways. And so hopefully people don't see it as, a periphery asset, as you've noted in your question, but something that people understand. And certainly this study will help that, I think.
I think the question is probably geared more towards inland cities, but just from a New Orleans perspective. Of course, New Orleans has a very strong tourism economy. There has been an effort over the past few years to make the riverfront more accessible. Of course, if you go downtown into the French Quarter, there's Waldenburg Park, which is all along the river. The aquarium's on the river. The city now has a Crescent Park, which actually has some bridges over the train tracks to make it more pedestrian friendly to walk right. You're like literally right at the banks of the river. Get great views of vessels and barge tows. But there's another development too, just adjacent to our administration building. That's the River District development, which is it's going to be a mixed-use entertainment as well as living space and a hotel that's going up just pretty much adjacent, as I mentioned, to our administration building. So we see a lot of riverfront development. Of course, we're very focused on the marine and cargo related development, but trying to find that right blend where the community developments are able to integrate harmoniously with the more trade and business side of activities.
I think Janine said it perfectly. It's that harmony and balance between the essential function that our inland waterways provide for commerce and then balancing that with the livability. I know here in the Pacific Northwest, a really great example of how that's happened is the Port of Kalama, Washington. They are a major grain exporter. That's been their bread and butter for many, many years. And at the same time, in recent years, they've created an opportunity for American cruise lines as well to be a cruise destination. And they've built a great public market next to it, but they've really done an exceptional job of having a buffer between the cargo operations and the grain and the cruise operations. So they've managed to make the waterway along the Columbia River much more accessible to residents and commercial development, and at the same time maintaining its core function of industrial property development. So thinking about in an urban planning context, how you have that buffer between the two, because I do believe you can accomplish both, but it does take a comprehensive look at making sure that you have both functions, commerce and community attributes both happening at the same time.
Yes. Let's get one more question. And Janine, I'm going to start with you on this one. Has there been any progress regarding river vessels specifically designed for container on barge? I know you mentioned some of the container on barge programs that are happening in the Port of New Orleans.
Yes, so Ingram is the company that's operating container on barge in Louisiana, as well as America's Central Port today. They also had a Memphis operation, but because of some market dynamics, that operation is basically on pause right now. So really it's New Orleans, Baton Rouge, and St. Louis for our container on barge operation. There's also a company that many have probably heard of called American Patriot Holdings. And so APH, as they're commonly known, they have a model for container on vessel, river-going container on vessels, which are able to hold 1,200 containers or so. But basically, they're looking at a network that would include New Orleans, Memphis, and St. Louis. And so the idea is that basically be a conversion of truck and rail volume moving inland and moving from inland locations converted to these purpose-built river vessels that would also use green fuels. Originally they were looking at LNG, and now they're looking at more of a methanol opportunity there. But they have the designs and basically are working with some shipyards and as well as working on the financing piece. So we've been engaged with them just on a lot of the business studies. I know the Soy Transportation Coalition has been quite supportive, as some other entities. So I think it's definitely a model that has some traction in terms of moving exports inland, as well as offering a very green solution on the import side. There's just some complexities in terms of longer transit times on the import leg, as well as is there the necessary infrastructure and equipment in those inland locations to efficiently work container on vessel. So more to come, I'm sure, on that, but that's just kind of an update.
Awesome. Thanks, Janine. We have about 5 minutes left. This is probably going to be our last question. So we've talked a lot about, an array of different benefits, all the ones in the study and more. And I think as we as we continue having this conversation about, redeveloping waterfronts and, how much congestion we have on roadways, it sounds like there's a great opportunity for the waterways in, our national goods movement and otherwise, conversation. How do we protect these waterways and kind of add to the resiliency of these waterways? What kind of resources and where do we need to invest in our waterways?
I think I'll just jump in here quickly, and then the others certainly please jump in. We've talked about the need to invest and make more reliable and more efficient our inland waterways infrastructure, and certainly resiliency is very important. As I said, we are an intermodal network of transportation options. Of course, we feel waterways is the best. It's best for the environment. It's best for traffic congestion relief. It's the most fuel efficient and the safest, and it allows our shippers to compete in the world market, as we've said. But again, we have the opportunity and the ability to move more cargoes and different kinds of cargoes on the inland waterway system. And so I think that's something that, everybody should sort of look at when you're talking about transportation planning. It is the safest way to move those products out of harm's way, if you will. We don't want to be sitting behind, 1,050 trucks, which are equal to a 15 barge standard tow on our inland waterways, when we're trying to get to our kids' soccer game or to get home for dinner after work or whatever it may be. So I think, if all of those transportation planners kind of don't stovepipe thinking about how we can grow this network, and certainly that goes hand in hand with modernizing and investing in modern infrastructure.
Absolutely. Does anyone else have an additional comment?
Yeah, I really see the resiliency piece as like a public-private sector partnership, the public being government support at the federal and state level, as well as the advocacy groups like WCI and National Waterways. And then the private sector coming in, helping just with the messaging and demonstrating the critical importance of maintaining inland waterway infrastructure to, the economy and to basically the job impact. Because a theme, I guess, throughout is just kind of it's not something a lot of people know about unless you touch the inland waterway system in some way. But for those of us that do recognize the huge importance, it's about really getting the buy-in from stakeholders, at the political level, as well as community in some cases. So really just kind of across the board from a public and private sector partnership to, get the message of how important the waterways are.
Absolutely.
I would just add to the advocacy part of that, and that was really well said, Janine and Deb, in terms of, as those of us that go back and work with Congress on these issues, Janine's exactly right. You don't really think about the inland waterways unless you are directly connected to it. But then again, nobody thought about supply chains until we had a supply chain crisis, and they couldn't figure out why there was no goods on the shelves in the grocery stores. And so it's the same with our inland waterways. But the fact is, we don't want it to become a crisis. We want to be able to continue to grow the system. As Deb said, it is the most economical and environmentally best way for goods movement, in addition to all of the other benefits that this great report called out. So just continued advocacy. I know that we are constantly connecting our inland farmers with our members of Congress that are out on the coast, because they do actually understand the importance of the waterways, but we need to do that nationally.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think that's about all the time we have. So thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar. You can find a recording of the webinar on our website starting tomorrow. That is enotrans.org. Make sure to sign up for our mailing list to gain access to the free Eno Connector newsletter, webinar announcements, report releases, and more. Again, Eno's happy to offer our webinar series free of charge. If you enjoy our webinars and are interested in supporting Eno's work, you can check out the link in the chat box to donate or become a member. Thank you to my wonderful panelists and to my co-moderator, Deb, and to our audience. Thank you for your engagement. Y'all have a great afternoon.